Okay, how's everybody doing? So it's Mr. Silva again. I'm just want to have a quick conversation with you about a couple things that we've kind of been discussing in class. Water has been a big part of it. We talked about water's polarity and structure and how super important it is to living things. So two of the big things with water is knowing its two major characteristics are adhesion and cohesion. We talked a little bit about how adhesion means that water sticks to other things, and cohesion, water sticks to itself. Some of these properties are what gives the ability to have life on Earth is because of those two major properties, and it also dictates things like the fact that water when it's solid or cold, it actually is larger than when it's warm, which is the only thing on the planet that works that way. Usually when things are cold, they get smaller, and things are warm, they get bigger. Water does completely opposite. And water is also the base of a lot of our biological systems. So these are once again the properties of water. We've talked about adhesion, cohesion. We have kind of the solvent piece yet. We'll get into more of that in chapter 4. Um, Ability to make ions. That's going to be kind of today's conversation in class. Is about acids and bases. So water forms ions, and when it does this, we start thinking about the pH scale, and we're going to talk about the pH scale range is basically from 0 to 14. Water being in the middle, neutral, and hopefully this will help. Water's polar, meaning that it has a positive, negative pole, or slightly positive, slightly negative area, which allows it to make those 4 hydrogen bonds. So once again, we talked this in class. We talked about the fact that there's this tug of war going on between oxygen and hydrogen. Because oxygen is much larger mass and electronegativity wise, these electrons that hydrogen has tends to get pulled more towards oxygen than the hydrogen atom. So this electron, even though it doesn't give up, isn't given up completely, it's given off enough that we start to get these negative areas. And remember, there's also a pair of electrons here and a pair of electrons here from oxygen, which also helps with that negativity there. So this is where these 4 hydrogen bonds come in. Here's that example again. Once again, the hydrogen of one atom of water or molecule of water will be attracted to the oxygen of a second molecule of water, whereas the hydrogens of other water molecules will be attracted to the negative areas of this particular water molecule. Once again, the 4 covalent bonds. I'm going to skip this. We'll talk more about this as time goes on, but you'll see this in biological systems where water has the ability to retain heat, which is kind of interesting. Your homes might have a heating system that has water that runs through pipes. So you heat the water runs through the pipes, and that water then dissipates the heat into the rooms in your house. It's called a forced hot water system. It also does the opposite. Water is also good at removing heat from systems. So think of a biological system yourself. When you get too warm, you sweat. The water gets on the outside of your body, you cool down, and that's evaporative cooling, they call that. I'm going to kind of continue here. Cohesion, adhesion, we talked about these things. Surface tension, I'll let you read this on your own time. This PowerPoint actually is in with your materials. I'm going to flip forward to a couple here, and I want to talk about, here we go, dissociation of water. This is something that we're going to talk about in today's class on the 10th of September. So the dissociation of water is the separation of hydrogen ion from the OH portion of the water. So you're splitting the water into 2 pieces, and you create these ions, positive and negative. You've heard the term acids and bases before. Acids tend to be pH 0 to 7. Bases are 7 to 14. Acids give off hydrogens where bases receive hydrogens, and we'll get into more of that in class. pH scale, super straightforward. 0 to 14, 14 being basic, 0 being acidic. Almost impossible to have a pH of 0 and a pH of 14. You can get close, but for the most part, 1 and 14 are real. 1 and 13 are really about as far as you're going to see. So anyway, pH obviously neutral is 7. When you go above 7, it's basic. When you go below, it's acidic. Has to do with the number of OH ions. If you notice here, they're talking about pH 7. that the number of dissociations or separations of water molecules is equal. All right, we'll discuss this in class a little more as well. When you have pHs that are acidic, you're going to have a much higher percentage of hydrogens than OHs. And in a solution that's basic, it's going to have more OHs than hydrogens. And in once again, biological systems or human bodies, animal bodies, plants, there are these things called buffers. And buffers allow you to absorb either free hydrogen or free OH. And the idea behind that is that changes in your body chemistry, whether foods you eat, exercise you do, that causes your body to make too many hydrogen ions or too many OH ions, your body's able to buffer or to withstand these changes in pH. Right? There becomes a point where it doesn't work anymore, and the buffers become overused, and your body's not able to find that balance again. But we'll get into that as we cover more systems. Organic chemistry, this is kind of the direction that we're going. We talked about carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen earlier, about the idea of carbon making 4 bonds, nitrogen making 3, oxygen making 2, and hydrogen making 1 bond with their valence electrons. Yep. Hydrocarbons, so we're going to have a conversation about, I'm going to flip a couple forward here, about these things called functional groups. So functional groups are things that are attached to carbon skeletons. For example, here we have a skeleton of carbon. So the skeleton you're seeing here is 4 hydrogens in a row, called a chain. You can also see those 4 carbons in a row as a chain. And you can take these same 4 carbons and you can rearrange them a little differently. Instead of having it, 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row, here we have 1, 2, 3, and a 4th one off the center. All right, so the arrangement is different, which causes molecules to act differently because they're going to have different properties. We call those isomers, and we'll once again get more into these in class. Isomers come in 3 varieties. There's structural, geometric, and enantiomers. Once again, we'll cover each one of these more in class. All right, they'll make more sense once we start getting into them. So isomers, by definition, are things with the same chemical formula but different arrangement of ions. Here we have, I believe this is butane, and this is isobutane, which they have the same number of atoms, 4 carbons, and in this case 10 hydrogens, but their arrangement of the carbon atoms and the hydrogens are different. Below we have, this is a geometric isomer. It's tough to see in this picture, but there's a double bond between these C's. Okay, and if you notice, the red X's or pink X's here, they're either on one side or the other. This is an example of a geometric isomer. Geometric isomers, by definition, have a double bond between carbons, and you end up with functional groups, which are these X's here, which dictate their function, on different sides of the bond. Notice we have same side and we have different side. One place you've seen a lot of this or heard a lot of this is something called trans fats. Trans means opposite. So in this case, this is a trans isomer. Cis, C-I-S, means same in Latin. This is a cis isomer. They're on the same side or they're on the trans side. Once again, we'll get more into this in our lecture. Enantiomers. Think about like gloves. Like if you have a pair of ski gloves or driving gloves or a pair of gloves that you use for anything, maybe you play lacrosse or hockey or something along those lines. When you put gloves on your hands, gloves only have a left-right version. Enantiomers are literally left-right versions. And you see these a lot, excuse me, in the pharmaceutical industry, where there are drugs that they make in a left and right version. Some work, some don't, depending on the left or right version. So once again, we'll get more into that in class. One particular drug I can think of off the top of my head is something called dopamine. There's L-Dopa and Dopa, and they have to do with tremors in Parkinson's patients. There's one that works, there's one that doesn't. So there's a left-right version. Functional groups, these once again we'll get into a little bit more in class. I don't want to spend too much time on them here. But you're going to see that there are these things that stick to carbon atoms. For example, here there's an OH sticking to a bunch of carbons and hydrogens. This group on the end, called a functional group, dictates how they work. Okay, there are different types of functional groups, and I apologize for the way the slide is set up, but here you go again. You have two carbons in a functional group, carbon and a functional group. All right, here we have rings of carbon, and there's going to be functional groups that kind of bond off these. We'll go through each one of these groups in class, give you examples, and kind of go from there. As far as that goes, I think this is it for this video, but with the functional groups, you are going to have to memorize them. There's really no easy way around them. There are 6 total. There's, I believe, hydroxyl, carboxyl, amino, sulfhydryl, phosphate, and which one am I missing? And carbonyl. Okay. Some of these terms will be familiar. For example, carbonyl, there's something called a ketone. If you've heard of something called acetone, acetone is a ketone that's found in nail polish remover. Aldehydes, you've probably heard of those as well. Aldehydes are like formaldehyde. It's a preservative that they use in specimens for science. They are functional groups, so they have these. They'll give certain functions based on where they are in the molecule. All right, we'll pick this up in class, and hopefully this helps. Have a good day.